Kazakhstan, a name not on the lips, not even on the radar of most Western people just over a week ago.
We, however, have been there many times. It's an amazing country, amazingly rich, and amazingly strategically placed.
Sharing a 1,700-kilometre border with Russia, with China, another border, you can see what certain powers were first attracted to.
Oil and gas, mineral-rich, a giant country with a tiny population. It's not the first time there's been an uprising in Kazakhstan, although the last time Mr. Tony Blair was hired to help the regime spin their way out of it.
He almost got a knighthood out of it. But now the tables have turned, the plates have shifted. You'll get more sense from our first guest, Bryan McDonald, journalist and expert based in Moscow. Bryan, thanks for joining us. Events in Kazakhstan, is it an organic, popular uprising of workers who've been ill-treated in the distribution of wealth, or is it a foreign regime change operation, or could it be both?
I think it's a lot of everything, George Gayan, to be honest with you. I think, there's first of all, the inequality thing you mentioned is very important to talk about from the very start. At the end of the day, the protests started because the price of liquefied petroleum, LNP, which is it's not common in the UK, but people who've traveled on the continent might see it. It's very common in Germany, for example. It's a type of fuel where there's a big tank, usually in the boot of the car, and it's cheaper but less efficient than normal petrol, and considered to be better for the environment as well, which is why I think it's so popular in places like Germany and Belgium. Basically, anyway, if you've ever gone to one of those countries and been unable to put your suitcase in the back of a car because of it, you will know. So basically what happened is that it used to cost 11 cents in US dollars for a litre of this stuff. And it was subsidized heavily by the government in Nur Sultan, as it's known now. It used to be Astana. And Astana. And basically, the government felt it could no longer afford to regulate the price within the confines of the state budget as it is, even though Kazakhstan is a huge natural gas and oil producer. It's one of the top 10 gas producers in the world and one of the top 20 in the production of petroleum, or export of petroleum, sorry. And basically what happened was they allowed the free market, which we all know about, when the free market takes its hand, to regulate the prices instead. And the price basically doubled almost automatically. I mean, it went from 11 cents to about 22 cents almost straight away. It had been flagged, but it had not been flagged perhaps to people or telegraphed to people that it was going to rise so dramatically. Now, the reason inequality comes into this, George, is because at the end of the day, Kazakhstan has a GDP in purchasing power parity terms of somewhere in the region of $30,000 a year officially. Now, given the black economy there, it's probably even a bit higher in real terms. That is about the same as the official GDP per capita. It's about the average of Eastern Europe, to be honest with you, the EU, Eastern Europe states, places like Hungary, Russia itself, for example, Latvia, Poland, countries like that. They're all in and around that $30,000 per capita GDP. So in a country like that, which is a middle-income country, and as I said, because of the black economy, which is also very relevant to Russia, the real figure is probably higher. If ordinary people can't afford 11 cents, which is about 9 pence or 8 pence in British pounds for a litre of gasoline, I mean, that suggests a severe inequality in that country. I mean, I don't know, how much is a litre of petrol at the moment in the UK? £1.50 maybe, something like that?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So there you go. I know it's €170 in Ireland, for example. So in Russia here, it's about something in the region of 60 pence a litre here in Russia. But then in Russia, it's heavily subsidized because Russia is the biggest oil producer in the world, obviously. So, they can do that. But to say in Kazakhstan that, that the ordinary people are balking at paying 22 cents a litre, that certainly speaks to the fact there must be incredible inequality in what is a middle-income country. I mean, a country where incomes on average should be similar to Poland. And I'd imagine in Poland, petrol is probably about €1.20, €1.30, for example, which is $1.50, $1.60. Now, that's one element to it. Another element to it is that there were striking workers in the west of the country. They were the guys who protested about the gas. A lot of them worked in the transport industry. A lot of them were truck drivers and, hauliers and transport people and stuff like that. Then there were urban rallies, which were largely peaceful in the beginning, which perhaps people in the cities kind of saw it as an opportunity to, release some pent up tension against the government there. That's, essentially it's been a single party state since the Soviet collapse 30 years ago, with Nursultan Nazarbayev in control for most of that period until 2 years ago. In fact, he was actually in control in the 80s as well. So it basically, in a way, the Soviet Union never ended in Kazakhstan because it's had the same leadership since the Gorbachev, era right through to now, essentially. Tokayev, the new guy, only came in about 2 years ago, but Nursultan remained, the kind of father of the nation. So it's not like Russia, where you've gone from Gorbachev to Yeltsin to Putin to Medvedev back to Putin, or, the UK, which has had probably 6 prime ministers since the 80s, I'm just off the top of my head, or America. So it's a country that never really experienced, a bit like Belarus, it kind of just segued from the Soviet Union into something, into an independent state, and the same elites have dominated throughout. Whereas in Russia, for example, the old Soviet elites were completely cleared out. Then a new elite came in with Boris Yeltsin, and another new elite came in with Putin, Medvedev. And finally, armed elements clearly also got involved very quickly, after about a day or two. And that's what's been all over your television screens in the UK, the looting, the violence, the shooting. And they're obviously not working class striking people. I mean, the idea that, that some of the NGOs are saying that this is completely organic sounds a bit ridiculous now. The idea that, working class guys who are balking at paying, 16, 17 pence for a litre of gasoline are suddenly able to become so organized that they can mount an armed coup against the state within 2 days. I mean, that's obviously implausible. So what has probably happened is that mafia elements, perhaps with some coordination from outside, or, split in the elite.
Yeah, the big question. One of the most disturbing things I have read for a long time was the report in the Indian media today, of all places, about biolabs that had been established in many different parts of Kazakhstan, including right outside Almaty, the epicenter of this rioting, where, well, let's be blunt, biological weapons, although it's posed as an antidote to biological weapons, but it's biological weapons, have been being researched there in labs established by the Kazakh regime with the Americans, with the Germans, with a variety of NATO partners. How was that possible in a CSTO country that's now entirely dependent on the CSTO to stop it from going under? How was it possible for all this to happen?
Well, see, this is a wider issue that Moscow has been concerned about in the CSTO/CIS, which is Commonwealth of Independent States region. For example, in Armenia, as you know from the war last year, when Armenia is full of American NGOs as well. I mean, and they were actually essentially welcomed in by the new government when it took power a few years ago. I mean, you even saw last year, well, actually it's 2 years ago now, where Mike Pompeo was in Minsk, for example, meeting Alexander Lukashenko, who's now, of course, a pariah as far as the Americans are concerned. And Belarus was kind of welcoming, American involvement. It was trying to sign deals to import petroleum directly from the States rather than from where it's always gotten it from Russia. Ukraine, of course, famously was full of American NGOs under a notionally pro-Russian government, in the early part of the last decade. So what happens in a lot of these countries, George, to answer your question, is that in a lot of these countries, the kind of inclination they don't want to be totally reliant on Russia as they see it. So they see that by kind of trying to hedge Russia against the West, that somehow it kind of increases their independence or something. And also there's a bit of naivety at play. Don't forget that the very corrupt regime in Kazakhstan has extensive property interests in the West, as we all know. You've been reading about in the UK papers. And it is also in their interest. And we've, Tony Blair, Sir Tony Blair, as he is known now, and I believe he insists on being called Sir Anthony or Sir Tony, which, anyway, George knows him better than I do anyway. But anyway, basically, Sir Tony, to give him his title, received millions and millions of pounds from the government in Nur Sultan. So what tends to happen with a lot of these elites in these countries is that they are looking for acceptance from the West. They kind of want elite families to attend Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and all these fancy places. They want to be welcome, you know, in society in London and New York and stuff like that. So that's a weakness that they have.
Yet, Brian, they are now relying on Russia for their troops and their assistance. And not just Russia, China too has offered their help.
Absolutely on point. What you just said is completely correct. Basically, the very same thing happened in Armenia. I mean, they invited all the American NGOs in, and then as soon as the fan, you know, they were begging Moscow for help when Azerbaijan attacked them, you know, well, it didn't attack them, it attacked Nagorno-Karabakh, the area they de facto administered in the latter part of the year before last. And, you know, and the same in Belarus. I mean, 1 minute Lukashenko is his arms around Pompeo, shaking hands in Minsk, and a few months later, he's basically begging Vladimir Putin for help, you know, when there's a massive protest movement he can't control in Minsk. And the same thing has now happened in Kazakhstan. So what happens with these elites is that they sort of have a gullibility about them. They have a gullibility and a cravenness about them where they seek, you know, sort of like, you know, acceptance in the West. They want to cozy up to the West. But as soon as everything goes wrong, and as soon as the you-know-what hits the fan, they're running back to Moscow going, please, please, Vladimir, help me. You know, that's basically what happens, and it's just happened again.
I knew you were the expert. Brian, thanks for joining us on board the Sputnik.
Always a pleasure, George.